Welcome to the annual Bohdan Bociurkiw Memorial Lecture. I'm Heather Coleman. I'm the director of the program on religion and culture at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. We gather today on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of diverse First Nations and Métis people who form a vibrant part of our community today. These lands have been from time immemorial a meeting place. Those of us who are settlers enter a site of exchange and join our voices to a long conversation in the spirit of mutual discovery and reconciliation. As we mark the 150th anniversary this year of Treaty 6, we honor the principles of the treaty and recognize that we are all treaty people. Each year, the research program on religion and culture at the CIUS sponsors the Bohdan Bociurkiw Memorial Lecture. These lectures honor the memory of Professor Bohdan Bociurkiw, one of the founders of CIUS and an eminent political scientist and internationally renowned specialist in human rights, Soviet religious policy, and the history of the Ukrainian churches. This year is particularly special as we mark the 100th anniversary of Professor Bociurkiw's birth on the 2nd of September 1925. Dr. Bociurkiw began his academic career at the University of Alberta, where he taught in the Department of Political Science from 1956 to 1969. He went on to teach at Carleton University in Ottawa, where he founded the Institute of Soviet and East European Studies, which is now the Institute of European, Russian, and Eurasian Studies, and he served as its first director. A specialist in Soviet politics with a special emphasis on Soviet Ukraine and church-state relations, he was the author of a great many books and articles. His final book, The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and the Soviet State, 1939 to 1950, was published by CIUS Press in 1996, and then in Ukrainian, in cooperation with the Catholic University in Lviv in 2005, and copies of it are available out here afterwards to have a look or to buy. That book remains the authoritative work on the subject in English and is widely read here and in Ukraine today. In 1994, Professor Bociurkiw's generous donation of his extensive library and archives to the CIUS represented the first step in the eventual creation of the research program on religion and culture. And the collection contains many unique items and documents pertaining to the Ukrainian churches and served as the basis for the program's research library. The annual Bohdan Bociurkiw Memorial Lecture brings to Edmonton a specialist working in the subject areas that interested Professor Bociurkiw throughout his career: religion and politics and Ukrainians. It's an important opportunity for a meeting of scholars and the wider Edmonton community. Although we've held the lecture virtually for all but one of the last 5 years, first due to the pandemic and then because of the war. So it's a real delight to be back at St. John's Cultural Centre here in the heart of Edmonton for an in-person event this year, and welcome everybody. It's also a great pleasure to introduce today's lecturer, Natalia Shlichta, professor of history and chair of the department at the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Thinking about Bohdan Bociurkiw's centennial, I really wanted to invite someone who was truly carrying on his work. And the first person who leapt to mind was Dr. Shlichta, and she accepted. Her major research interests are ecclesiastical history of the 20th century, particularly of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and the Russian Orthodox Church, and the history of everyday life in the Soviet Union. Whereas Dr. Bociurkiw laid the groundwork for the study of the Greek Catholic Church in the Soviet Union from the perspective of church-state relations as a political scientist, Dr. Shlichta has built on that work, exploring what the experience of the so-called reunification of the Ukrainian Catholic Church with the Russian Orthodox Church was like for ordinary people. Her major publications include a monograph in Ukrainian. The English title is The Church of Those Who Survived, Soviet Ukraine from the mid-1940s to the early 1970s, and a textbook in Ukrainian on the history of Soviet society, as well as many peer-reviewed articles in Ukrainian, Russian, English, and German language journals, and books as well, dealing with religious life under communism. She also studies Soviet historiography more generally. She's participated in numerous international projects in the fields of her interest. Right now, she's involved with one, and I don't know how, it's HERUKR at the University of Leuven, and it's a project that explores challenges and opportunities for EU heritage diplomacy in Ukraine. So the research that Dr. Schlichter will be talking about today emerges from her interests in the history of religious life in the Soviet period and in microhistory. As many in the audience here today will know, almost exactly 80 years ago, on March 8th to 10th, 1946, a council gathered in Lviv at which the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was forcibly reunited with the Russian Orthodox Church. On the one hand, this created the largest underground church in communist Europe. But actually, most parishes did reunite, and they existed as part of the Russian Orthodox Church. Dr. Schlichter is going to take us into the life of that reunited church through the lens of one priest. So her talk today is titled, A Priest in Soviet Western Ukraine Between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, Father Mykhailo Datsyshyn, 1914 to 1993. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Schlichter.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It's my great pleasure to be here, and I'm sorry, now it's okay. And I'm truly grateful for the invitation. So first of all, I'm grateful for the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Study for this beautiful initiative to have a memorial lecture of Bohdan Bociurkiw each year. And second, I'm truly grateful for the invitation to deliver this lecture today. It's my real honor, pleasure, and it's so important for me because Bohdan Bociurkiw is not just a name for me, and actually his studies in a way formed my understanding of church life in Soviet Ukraine and actually stimulated my interest in the history of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. So this is very important for me. And shall we start? Yeah, it's just that I need to make this convenient for me and for you. Okay, let's hope it works. As Heather already mentioned, we have just she mentioned this Lviv Council, and I'll start with a very brief introduction, contextualization for Father Datsyshyn's life. Shortly after Galicia, the last bastion of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, was integrated into the Soviet Union on the eve of the Second World War, the Stalinist leadership decided the fate of the church based on its imperialist and anti-religious policies. The decision to liquidate the Uniate Church, Uniatskaya Tserkav, as this church was called in all Soviet period documents, was driven by several reasons, including geopolitical considerations, Soviet nationality policies, and also social engineering. On March 8-10, 1946, the so-called Council of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was convened in Lviv under the initiative and pressure of the Stalinist regime. We have now declassified KGB files that allow us to completely reconstruct how Soviet security organs orchestrated this специальная акция, special action. This council, pseudo-council, was formally led by the so-called initiative group for the reunion of the Greek Catholic Church with the Russian Orthodox Church. And you can see people here on this slide. This pseudo-council, it declared the willingness of the faithful of this church, I quote, to liquidate the Unia, to sever all ties with the Vatican, and to return to the Holy Orthodox faith and the Russian Orthodox Church. In 3 years, the Greek Catholic Church was also liquidated in Zakarpatska Oblast, which marked the end of Greek Catholic's institutional existence in Soviet Ukraine, in Soviet Union actually, and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was legalized just before the USSR collapsed. The formal liquidation of this church, as we know, led to the emergence of the largest underground community in the 20th century East Central Europe. And the catacomb Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church became a symbol of resistance against Soviet repressive, anti-religious, anti-Ukrainian policies, and also of martyrdom for the faith. However, it was only a small part of the dissolved church that continued to exist underground. Most of the clergy and faithful, because of various reasons, from state pressure to the lack of ecclesiastical knowledge, so they decided to reunite with the Russian Orthodox Church. I'll be using the term reunite, reunited very often in my talk today, and I always mean this so-called reunification. It always in the quotation mark, as you will see. So as a result of this reunification campaign, you might see some statistic on the slide. The Russian Orthodox Church expanded immensely, gaining many parishes, many new priests, etc., etc. However, my research shows that this so-called reunited community, they became Russian Orthodox only formally, while for decades they maintained their integrity and their otherness within the Russian Orthodox Church. And I shall start with this beautiful picture and this beautiful quotation. You also can see Father Datsyshyn. So I can't show to you, but here's just on that side, second on that side. I like this picture, this photo of the clergy of the Orthodox street, the so-called Orthodox street deanery from the late 1950s, because when you have a look at them, you wouldn't say these are Orthodox clergy. So they are Ukrainian Greek Catholic clergy. They look like this, and we'll be back to this later on. And I also like this quotation. So this is the story Mrs. Datsyshyn told me, and this story about this very old priest in the center who is sitting in the center. So it's how he served in his parish when praying for the hierarchy. So I like to show this complex history of the reunited community through the life of Father Mykhailo Datsyshyn from the town of Stryi, my native town, in Lvivska Oblast. Like many other Greek Catholic priests, he officially reunited with the Russian Orthodox Church. He served in the parishes in Lvivska Oblast for nearly half a century. During this time, Orthodox ecclesiastical authorities regarded him to be firm Orthodox. Soviet officials suspected him of being covert Uniate. He maintained very close relations with the hierarchy of the underground church, and still this did not save him from being accused of being traitor, and he was accused by his parishioners in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and actually in November 1st, 1992, he was expelled from his parish, where he served for 30-something years for that and he was accused of being Orthodox, which led to his death a year afterwards. So this personal story demonstrates that the formal reunification with the Russian Orthodox Church, as mandated by the Stalinist regime, did not lead to religious conversion of Greek Catholics into Russian Orthodox, or assimilation of Galicians, Ukrainians to loyal Soviet subjects. Instead, by constructing a separate religious national identity and maintaining traditional non-Orthodox traditions, the reunited community managed to survive during the Soviet era. Still, this strategy was not without its flaws, as Father Datsyshyn's story demonstrates. And just briefly about sources, which an interview, a very long, comprehensive interview taken in February 1993 by Father Boris Gudziak, who communicated with Father Datsyshyn, and then a series of interviews that I personally conducted with his widow, Pani Yaroslava Datsyshyn, and also personal documents by Father Datsyshyn, memories of those who knew him, and some visual documents, etc., etc. So let's start. And we'll start with, and I also like to turn your attention to these two quotations from his interview. The first one is very important because it was, the interview was taken just after he was expelled from his parish. And the reason for him was when he was given this interview was just to show that he was not a traitor, that he served his church and his people over the Soviet period. And another quotation I think is very much important because it's about the nature of Soviet period, about the nature of Soviet state, which you can't understand if you are not in. I think that's something important. And we'll start with Father Datsyshyn's life. The future priest Mykhailo was born into a large peasant family on November 20, 1914, in the village of Dobrotvir in Lvivska Oblast, a region that became part of the Second Polish Republic at the Peace of Treaty in 1921. He completed elementary school in 1926 and was admitted to the Polish Gymnasium in 1927. The educational system in Poland during the 1920s and 30s aimed at assimilating national minorities among whom Ukrainians made up majority. To secretly study Ukrainian history, language, and literature, Ukrainian students here formed a religious cycle known as Mariinska Drużyna, the Blessed Virgin Mary cycle. Mykhailo Datsyshyn even faced persecutions for leading this cycle, as he remembers. In 1939, he was admitted to the Lviv Theological Academy, established by Metropolitan Andrei Sheptytsky, where he completed 4 classes before the Second World War began. During the first Soviet occupation of Galicia, 1939 to 1941, he served as a German language teacher and later as a school principal in the village of Novy Vitkiv, and also he studied at the Lviv Pedagogical Institute. In 1940, he married Yaroslava Mrozovska from a famous priestly dynasty. He returned to the Lviv Theological Academy under the Nazi occupation, completed his studies in 1942, and was ordained by Bishop Mykhailo Budka. And I draw attention to this thing at the slide about the character of his priestly education at the Lviv Theological Academy. So he was educated at the Eastern Rite, which was a part of a broader turn eastward suggested by Metropolitan Sheptytsky, and this step was seen by Sheptytsky in terms of the preparation of missionaries for their service among Ukrainians in Greater Ukraine during wartime. And we'll be back later to the impact that this education had on Father Datsyshyn both before and after 1946. So Father Datsyshyn's first parish was in the village of Bryaza, now Ivano-Frankivska Oblast, and you have a beautiful picture and also this part of the icon from his very first liturgy. Afterwards, just a second. He served in 3 different parishes and faced the end of the war and the return of Soviet troops in the village of Nezhukhiv, part of Stryi Rayon. His priestly service during the war also included the pastoral care of Ukrainian nationalist combatants from the Ukrainian insurgent army, which would have made him a collaborator in the eyes of the Soviet authorities if they had learned of it. But still, they knew that the family was unreliable, so the Soviet language term, because his 2 brothers had fought in the insurgent army. One has died, and the other was exiled for this. The decision to reunite was not easy or unproblematic for him, as we shall see. After the parish of Nezhukhiv, he served as the 2nd priest at the Assumption Church in Stryi from 1954 to 1961. Following the death of the first priest, Father Yevgen Gorodelovsky, the parish expected Father Datsyshyn to take over, but he was unreliable in the eyes of the Soviet authorities, and also he was very popular among parishioners, which decided his fate, and he was reassigned to a poor village parish in Dulibe and Hrabivtsi, where he served until his death. The Datsyshyns lived in Stryi. They had 2 sons, 2 daughters, and many grandchildren. Mrs. Datsyshyn vividly recalls how her family was marginalized because of her husband's priestly rank. The clergy was very severely taxed in the Soviet Union, up to 81% of their income, can you imagine? And their children had to identify themselves as being from the clergy, which led to their stigmatization in school and made it difficult for them to pursue higher education or build a career. She remembers that normal Soviet children distanced themselves, there's the quotation, from priest children because they smelled like incense. She also remembers how the story of her eldest son, Andrei, who entered the Institute of Physics and Mathematics in Lviv only after she bought a forged document stating that he was the son of a disabled craftsman, not of a priest. Father Datsyshyn served during this period as a spiritual mentor to many young priests who were studying at Orthodox theological seminaries but wanted to learn Greek Catholic teaching and traditions. His secret connections with the catacomb clergy continued over these decades, and it's important to mention here that generally relations between the reunited and catacomb communities were not at all friendly or close. Actually, catacomb church regarded reunited community to be traitors and apostates because they betrayed their faith, while reunited community, some from reunited priests, denounced the catacomb priests and reported on their clandestine activities to Soviet and Orthodox authorities. The overall picture, however, was much more complex because of the sacramental communication and personal relationships between the two communities. Father Mykhailo, for instance, was close with the underground priest Sebastian Zubretsky, whom you can see here, and also the relationship between the two communities grew closer after the Second Vatican Council. Besides sacramental communication, many reunited priests also became organizationally connected to the Catacomb Church since then, which was a part of the deliberate policies by underground bishops Velichkovsky and Volodymyr Sternyuk, and you can see them. Many reunited priests thus re-established themselves as Greek Catholic priests, but simultaneously they continued their service in the registered parishes of the Russian Orthodox Church. And these priests were permitted by the underground bishops even to celebrate the liturgy in accordance with Orthodox canons, in order not to show their re-establishment as the Greek Catholic priests, and you see the quotation explain the reason. In 1988, as the movement for the legalization of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church in the Soviet Union gained momentum, Father Datsyshyn, under the blessing of Archbishop Volodymyr Sternyuk, openly declared his parish to be a Greek Catholic one. Yet, as I've already told you, on November 1st, 1992, his parishioners expelled him from the village of Dulibe because he was Orthodox. His widow remembers, "This was such a terrible blow on him. I thought he would go mad." Such a traumatic event, combined with the fact that some young Greek Catholic priests renounced their mentor because he was Orthodox. So these facts led to his death a year later on December 14, 1993. And here you have a description by the Dean, Father Ivan Hovhera, attempting to somehow explain this whole situation of the early 1990s. Now let's move our attention. So you didn't see this slide, so okay, so now you see this slide about the 1980s, 1990s, and these words of Father Ivan Hovhera, and I'm sorry for these technical issues. And now we are moving to identity construction. After the arrest of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic hierarchy on April 1945, and especially following the decisions of the pseudo-council in Lviv in 1946, Greek Catholic priests faced two main choices: either to accept and stay with their parishes as Orthodox priests, or refuse, go underground, and face persecutions for their faith. The latter was mainly the decision of celibate priests and monks. Okay. These priests and monks, they rejected reunification as religious conversion. And I would like to draw attention to this understanding of reunification as religious conversion, and we'll see that the understanding of the reunited community was quite different. So they said, I quote, "How can you convince yourself in a few hours or days of what you have lived and believed in all your life? Changing your religion means starting your life anew." They made a conscious choice to preserve what they perceived to be true faith, not to betray Christ, and to face persecutions for their decision. Still, most married priests choose to reunite. While outwardly embracing Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, that's very important here, and Soviet identities, these Greek Catholics built a new identity which helped them preserve their religious and national distinctiveness through practice. This identity was seen as opposing these imposed identities and was based on a clear us versus them distinction. They were Russian Orthodox, and we included priests who signed reunification pledges and their parishioners who continued to attend their own churches, even though these churches have suddenly become Russian Orthodox. The complex prerequisites for such decision included the liturgical character of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, whose members were not prepared for a legal existence outside official church structures, and also an understanding of the totalitarian character of the state, Soviet state. There's no choice. There is a choice without a choice. So this is the explanation that we find in so many documents. Also, we should mention here a very negative attitude toward the Russian Orthodox Church that was seen to be a Moscowite, Bolshevik, state atheist church, an instrument of Moscow assimilatory policy, and also, which is very much important, the understanding of the reunification as an action by the regime, thus viewing it as a mere formality, a matter for the state. So we see here two very different understandings of reunification. It's a religious conversion that can't be done for catacomb community, and there's just a formality for reunited community. A common strategy was to suggest a formula of reunification that would allow for the concealment of the true Catholic identity. Mrs. Datsyshyn explains, the priest of the Stryi deanery wrote that they were for the unity of the Orthodox and Catholic churches. Actually, they wrote like this was Sheptytsky's idea. And Father Datsyshyn elaborates, this was a document that the Pope, the Patriarch, and every true Christian could sign. I do not say that I joined them, the Russian Church, but I want to say that they, two churches, have to unite. To explain his own reunification for himself and for the others, Father Mykhailo highlighted two main points. One, he did this to save his church, and second, celebrating the Eastern Rite made this choice without a choice somewhat easier and also enabled religious mission among Ruski Russians who were sent to Stryi as part of the Soviet migration policy. In the eyes of the reunited clergy, and please have a look at the quotations on this slide, they stood before a twofold task of saving the church. The first was to ensure the institutional survival of both the church and ecclesiastical traditions after the arrest of the hierarchy. And the second and equally important aspect was to protect our own church from Russian popes. Ruski popy, Mrs. Datsyshyn uses term popeke, Ruski popeke. So because they were all KGB agents. Even though Father Datsyshyn was much more pro-Orthodox than many other reunited priests because of his education in the Eastern Rite, he distanced himself from the Orthodox, arguing that they were traditionally, nationally alien and also backward. He believed that Orthodox faithful and even clergy did not understand the essence of the faith. They could only make the sign of the cross, and that's all. The Eastern Rite, so just remind you about the Eastern Rite, allowed Father Datsyshyn to hide his Catholic identity. Let us just be back to this slide. I was serving in the Eastern Rite while preserving the true Catholic spirit. To argue the viability of this strategy, he quoted Metropolitan Sheptytsky, who said, "Some people made faith out of ritual. This should not be done. Faith is a faith, and ritual is an extensional manifestation of faith, and one cannot be mixed with the other." It's important to stress here that Metropolitan Sheptytsky was the unquestioned authority for Father Mykhailo, the key figure enabling him to justify his own choice, both for himself and others. Father Mykhailo described his education at the Lviv Theological Academy in detail and recounted all his meetings and conversations with Metropolitan. He claimed Metropolitan Sheptytsky was the head of the Vatican's Eastern policy for 50 years, and he presented himself as a faithful follower of the Metropolitan's ideas and action. The core of Father Datsyshyn's religious and national identity, his sense of being part of the reunited community, can be summarized as follows. We were Greek Catholics, we remained Greek Catholics, and we retained everything that was ours. His granddaughter Sophia recalls, he was often envious of the priests who had been taken to Siberia. So they were martyrs. The priests instead, those priests who remained with their flock, could neither speak nor act, nor even think according to their conviction, but they had to remain shepherds of their people. The preservation of traditional church life and local religious traditions is seen as the major argument for maintaining a true Catholic identity through Soviet time, as we shall see in a second. The true Okay, let's once again to this. The true Greek Catholic identity of Father Datsyshyn is consistently reaffirmed when he describes his interaction with the underground priest Father Zubretsky and the bishops of the Catacomb Church Velichkovsky and Sternyuk. His widow also remembers that Bishop Velichkovsky visited them in Stryi very much frequently. Father Mykhailo stresses that he secretly celebrated liturgy and performed rituals at the bishop's request because the Catacomb Church lacked the clergy to meet the religious needs of all those who considered themselves true Catholics. And he was very proud to explain that Bishop Velichkovsky asked for those services only from those whom he considered Catholics. And predictably, his re-establishment in 1963 as a true Greek Catholic priest under Bishop Velichkovsky is seen as the strongest argument for why he had a clear conscience about his religious self. Still, there was something else why he had this clear conscience, and this the practice. And this the very important argument presented in his interview, because as you see, he served in the same parish for 31 years, and out of 1,100 families, there was only one Orthodox family. So we try to make people good Christians and good Greek Catholics. The preservation of traditional religious life at the practical level and also secret practices, they helped keep the reunited community alive and distinct within the Soviet Union. When I'm talking about traditional religious life, I'm talking about celebration of liturgy, performance of rituals, observation of religious feasts, and also maintaining church exteriors and interiors. When I'm talking about secret practices, I mean performance of unregistered rituals in the Orthodox Church that was forbidden both by the Church and by Soviet authorities. Also clandestine services for the Catacomb Church, which I've already mentioned, and informal teaching of seminarians and young priests that I also already mentioned. These efforts protected the community both from official anti-religious actions, which became especially intense since the 1950s under Khrushchev, as well as from Moscow's attempts at national assimilation. And examination of these practices reveals that the reunited community did not surrender to the atheist state as was expected by this state and as of what this community was accused of by the Catacomb Church. Instead, this community adapted to the new reality by using multiple techniques that align with James Scott's ideas of calculated conformity and passive non-compliance. And Colin McDonnell draws our attention to the materiality of Christianity. Material objects such as church buildings, candles, vestments, etc., do not simply, I quote, reflect an existing reality. Experiencing the physical dimension of religion helps bring about religious norms, behaviors, and attitude. Thus, materiality is important. Thus, practice is so much important. And here you have these pictures of a very poor quality from the private archive of the Datsyshyns, but you can see that the parish of Father Mykhailo, it has a look of a Greek Catholic parish with Greek Catholics' traditions, national vestments, etc. Let us be back to our first photo. So, these things is so much important. It was important to look differently, and it was equally important that this difference in appearance was recognized, and recognized as a very important difference both by Orthodox authorities and by Soviet authorities. So Soviet, and by the Catacomb Church, by the way. So Soviet and Orthodox officials, they actually cared a lot about these external appearances. And their conclusions were always the same, and they were that much pessimistic because the differences in the looks of the reunited on the one hand and Russian Orthodox on the other hand remained noticeable even years and decades after the reunification campaign. I would quote you a minor Soviet official, his report from the late 1950s, so just the same time, and he says the following, I'm sorry, I have never seen a single priest from among the former Uniates in a cassock with long hair and a beard with a cross on their chest and other attributes of Russian Pope. They mostly keep an outward appearance of a Greek Catholic priest, a paroch. And this is very much important because the Soviet official, he uses this linguistic distinction between Russian Orthodox Pope and Ukrainian Greek Catholic paroch. The same was true of churches, which maintained their internal and external appearances despite the demands of both ecclesiastical and Soviet authorities to assimilate, to remove benches, to remove Uniate icons, so I quote in document, and other church symbols with distinctly nationalistic appearance from the churches. Father Datsyshyn's churches in the villages of Dulibe and Hrabivtsi, you can see them here, did not change in accordance with these requirements. He protected these churches, masterpieces of Galician wooden architecture, for decades. The church of the birth of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Hrabivtsi was closed in 1961 and would have been destroyed if it was not for Father Datsyshyn. The church of St. George in Dulibe was built and carved by the renowned Hutsul master carver Vasil Turchenyuk in 1924. Father Mykhailo was protecting the church's unique wooden exterior and interior from any change or destruction. With this aim, he, as a local historian, gathered and shared information about the master. He published articles, actually, in the late 1980s in the newspaper about Vasil Turchenyuk. And he also requested assistance from the Institute of Ethnography in Lviv, and he continually appealed to the authorities to recognize the church as a monument of culture and architecture that would have protected it in front of Soviet anti-religious and anti-Ukrainian measures through the 1960s-1980s. We are moving further. Once again, this slide, and now I just remind you this nice episode of celebrating liturgy. So the distinctiveness of the religion of the united priests and their parishes within the Russian Orthodox Church was clearly reflected in their religious service, their celebration of liturgy, and their preaching, for example. So the requirements toward the celebration of liturgy were very strict, especially to the prayers for Orthodox hierarchy and the Soviet state. And it was so difficult to escape them because the Soviet authorities monitored how these former Uniate priests pray for the hierarchy and the Soviet state, but still, as this episode reminds us, they managed somehow to escape. While requirements to preaching was not as severe, so Orthodox authorities forbade the reunited priests from delivering sermons on strictly Catholic subjects. Such were body of Christ, head of Christ, the Immaculate Conception, and also about Catholic saints. But these people did this. So, very long quotation from Mrs. Datsyshyn. Father Datsyshyn remembers how they managed to do this. We followed the ancient truth. You do not talk about that which you can't talk about. This means that we kept silent during the feast of Saint Yosafat Kunsevich, for example, but we commemorated him quietly. Also, allegorical and metaphorical language was an important part and served him well when his church, for instance, was inspected, as explained by Mrs. Datsyshyn. Everyone who knew him remembers his thoughtfully prepared sermons, and some of these can be found also in his diaries. Also, Father Datsyshyn, we have many evidence of secret rituals and catechisms performed by Father Datsyshyn for children. And as I've already told you, he protected local religious practices, rituals, traditions, for instance, those linked to the celebration of Easter and Christmas, from any changes required by Moscow over the decades. But still, you remember this tragic episode of the early 1990s when he was expelled from his parish. And now, and this the last small part of my present lecture today, it's the present-day memory of Father Datsyshyn, which differs a lot from the perception of the early 1990s. In 2014, a monument was erected in the village of Duliber. I remind you this, the village that expelled him in 1992. So in 2014, they had this monument to celebrate his 100th anniversary and his 30 years of service there. Jubilee celebrations were held in Stryi, where he lived and served as a priest, as I told you, and also in the villages of Duliba and Hrabivtsi. In 2015, a collection of memories titled The Generous Field of Father Datsyshyn was published, along with a documentary based on oral interviews with people who knew him. In 2019, a special Jubilee event was organized in Stryi to commemorate 105th anniversary of his birth. And to my view, the title of this event was very much important: In Defense of the Faith, Father Mykhailo Datsyshyn as a forerunner of the revival of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. This title reflects the main idea of these commemorative activities, and also I have this quotation here from the evening of 2014, just when the idea was forwarded about the need of beatification of Father Datsyshyn. And the primary arguments in favor of beatification, so they were those which I presented today. During Second World War, he supported the Ukrainian nationalist underground by celebrating liturgies for them and burying their dead. His two brothers fought in the Ukrainian insurgent army. When the Soviets arrived, he did not leave his homeland. He chose to stay with his people, and he served in all his parishes, preserving Greek Catholic traditions, rituals, and he protected the wooden church masterpieces of Duliba and Hrabivtsi from destruction. He prepared young Greek Catholic priests for ordination and maintained close communication with underground bishops Velichkovsky and Sternyuk. And here is my last slide, and these two quotations here, which give us a completely different assessment of Father Datsyshyn's service and a completely different image of the reunited community from that by the Catacomb Church or from the 1990s, early 2000s. And actually, I would finish with an assumption that these might indicate, I'm not sure because I haven't done research so far on this, but it might indicate a shift in the official narrative of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and its collective memory of the Soviet period. The shift that might include and integrate the heritage of the reunited community, which has been excluded from its official narrative for decades. I'm not sure about this, but the last fact I would mention here, that Father Datsyshyn was a teacher to the present head of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, Archbishop Sviatoslav Sternyuk. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'll be happy to hear your comments and questions. Thank you.